The Ain't No Fang podcast. From Arizona Sports, Ain't No Fang.
Hey everyone, welcome into Ain't No Fang, Arizona Sports Diamondbacks podcast. I'm Alex Weiner, coming to you after the Diamondbacks completed a 3-game sweep of the Colorado Rockies at Chase Field. And joining me is our Suns guru who delves into Major League Baseball during this time of the year, especially. It's Kellan Olson. Kellan, how are you doing, man?
Hi, doing well. I filled in for Lauren Koval on Cardinals Corner last week, so I'm filling in for filling co-host here with Alex on Ain't No Fang. So I'm coming for Jeremy's podcast next. I got to replace David or Jesse or Jeremy on the ASU feed next.
We got to get a Wildcats podcast, apparently. I mean, you would be obviously the main candidate for that, right?
Oof. Yeah, we already kind of have one, Empire of the Suns, in the last 8 minutes. Whatever Kevin and I want to talk about or U of A basketball, we just tell people to stop listening if they don't care, and then we just have the podcast. So that's been the version of it. Cats Talk for 10 years running now, but Cats Talk could be its own thing, people. Sponsors listening, eagerly awaiting the debut.
As a Sun Devil, I'm not sure I'll be tuning in, but I do encourage, if you are a Wildcat, to listen to Cats Talk. Okay, so kind of the structure of this pod is that what can the rest of 2025 teach us about the 2026 Diamondbacks? Because the answer is quite a lot. And Kellan, you explored this question in a couple of articles that posted last week. The Diamondbacks sold at the deadline, and they are a different team now. And it's looked different. The brand of baseball has looked a little bit different. They're not relying so much on Gino hitting 3 homers in a series, and they're trying to win games a little bit differently, trying to be more aggressive on the bases. They're running out there with a kind of a youth movement in the bullpen, trying to be a faster, younger, more dynamic, and more athletic team. And that's what we've seen so far. In 9 games since the trade deadline, they've looked pretty good. They've been 6-3. They won in a series that they had to win against the Athletics, and then they sweep the Rockies finally after winning 2 out of 3 against the Rockies the first couple times that they played them. And then they have those Padres series where they probably should have at least won the series, but they come up short there. They lose a couple of heartbreakers and drop 2 out of 3. But for the most part, and it hasn't been the greatest competition in the world, they've looked pretty good, and this is going to be a fun week for them going up against the Texas Rangers. And so for this, I wanted to kind of get a sense of, what we're looking at in terms of who to watch the rest of the way. Obviously, Corbin Carroll and Peralta Perdomo, they're pretty solid. Those kind of guys are pretty solid. When you look into next year, I'm talking about more guys like, what does first base look like? What does third base look like? And so we can kind of go position by position and frame who are the guys to watch for the rest of the year, keep a close eye on, and how does that impact the Diamondbacks going forward. So we can kind of skim through a few of the positions that we kind of know the answer to that to and dive into other ones. So I guess to start around the diamond catcher, we know that Gabriel Moreno's the guy, and a big, storyline to watch is the fact that he's coming back from injury pretty soon. He's going to be in AAA Reno as a rehab assignment on Tuesday, and by the time the Diamondbacks play, at Chase Field again, if all goes to plan, Gabriel Moreno will be there with the team during their next homestand. Behind him, it's a little bit interesting because Adrian Del Castillo hasn't caught, really. He's caught 1 game, but since he got called up to the major leagues, I should say, because they've kind of turned it over to James McCann and Jose Herrera. But it's interesting, can they get Adrian Del Castillo any reps behind the plate, and would that teach us anything about whether or not he's the guy for next year? That's sort of the only question that, Bar's mentioning, I think, when we're looking at the future of the position for the Diamondbacks.
Yeah, for sure. I think that Gabby himself is sort of a guy to watch, not that asking if he can stay healthy for the remainder of the season, but I think already looking ahead to 2026, which is kind of the whole point of the conversation, is I think we will go into next year doing the if he's healthy thing with Gabby, just because he has found a way every year so far to have some sort of injury come up. Now, a lot of those have been just it's been unfortunate luck. But at the same time, this luck does seem to just follow some guys, unfortunately. Bradley Beal was very injury prone last year, but he was stepping on guys' foot at the same time. So you wanted to feel bad for the guy. Gabby's been in this position where he's been, unfortunately, missing extended time all of these seasons so far. And with that, to your point, the backup catcher position has been important to watch, more important than normal. I would phrase that. So I do wonder if ADC does get behind the plate a couple of times. I do think something we're going to be talking about a little bit later is if Jordan Lawler comes up and Blaze is still playing the way that he does, do you move one of those guys to second? Do you put Cattell at DH? And then does that put Del Castillo back behind the plate? But if Gabby's back, where do you put him? ADC hasn't hit the ball particularly well so far when he's come up. He's looked very miffed by the pitching that he has been facing. So far, McCann was hitting the crap out of the ball when he first started. It's dropped off a bit. And then Jose Herrera has basically been Jose Herrera. But a lot of the intrigue for everyone kind of coming in, Alex, was at first, obviously, with Locklear. And what have been your first impressions of him so far? Because we were worried about the strikeout numbers. Those have been there. But what else have you seen from him?
Yeah, with Locklear, I think, he made a good first impression, couple hits in his third game. First home game at Chase Field, he blasts a ball. I like the fact that he's drawing walks. It seems like he's putting together, some pretty good at-bats. Not all of his at-bats have been great, but he's putting together some pretty good at-bats for a younger guy coming up with a new team, new philosophies, all that kind of stuff. The power, from what we saw in that one swing was pretty evident, and what we see when he's working behind the scenes in batting practice, he's out there pretty much first all the time. At least on the homestand, you get to the ballpark, extremely early for these games, and you kind of pop out and see who's doing what. And Locklear is always a guy that's, taken early BP before a lot of other guys. And so all that stuff is good to see. But there's some stuff at the plate that needs to improve. He's only been here like a week change. But at the same time, some of the swing decisions need to improve. Putting yourself into better counts is certainly something that needs to improve as well. He's just a guy, again, he has the tools, and those are very obvious, but it's just about, in the major leagues, you can have all of that and still not hit. It's about putting yourself in good positions to get the pitch that you are looking for. And so far, with him chasing a little bit and swinging and missing a little bit, he hasn't quite done that yet. So, I'm curious, we have like a 10-game sample size of a 9-game sample size of him so far. What does the 30-game sample size for him look like? But he's definitely like really, really high on the list of guys that we need to keep a close eye on because, are we going to learn if he's the first baseman of the future the rest of the season? We might, but we might not. It may take another season to figure that out as well. But he is somebody who can kind of gain a lot of trust and optimism if he can finish off the season really well.
Yeah, and I think it was very well put there by saying, like, we have seen 9 baseball games so far, and the whole point of these 2 months is that Locklear is not just going to get 9 games, strike out a bunch, and then get sent back down. Like, he is going to keep playing. Yeah, he gets to keep playing, and that's where the discussion at first base and, like, the infield in general does get interesting because it's like, okay, I think we've seen enough of Pavin Smith to know what he is at this point, and we don't really know what Locklear is yet, where you want to see Locklear continue to be the everyday first baseman. This is a situation where, you would say, well, you can just, like, hit Pavin at DH in the matchups and, like, go from there. But again, as we mentioned, like, other guys are performing well that you would want to see get more playing time.
It's
the
all
Locklear
connected
thing at the
too,
plate,
because like with first base, when Pavin Smith comes back from the injured list, which he's in the Moreno camp, he's going to be at AAA Reno this week, and by the next homestand, he'll probably be ready. You want to split time with him and Locklear. I think you'd want to get Locklear more looks at first base, but they have the DH to play with to start both of them. But then what does that do with Adrian Del Castillo? Does he get squeezed out? Does he get everyday playing time in AAA? Is that better for him anyway, to get everyday playing time as a catcher in AAA as they try to figure out what his role is going forward? But does that put you in the best, position to, win games down the stretch of this season if that matters at all? So it's all these kind of moving parts. I think the main thing, though, is you want to get Locklear everyday reps and everyday looks to try to establish something there. And then you kind of have to figure out where Pavin Smith fits into that, because they would like to get him going. He's still a guy who's under contract for next season. Even though it feels like, we've kind of been there, done that with Pavin Smith, he's still a guy who, might be kind of in the planning for next season, depending on what the roster looks like at the end of the offseason.
For sure. With Locklear, I'm really interested to just see where the numbers are at the end of the year with the sample size specifically. Because, again, we're working with really 2 small sample sizes, 20 strikeouts and 45 at-bats last year, 14 and 32 this year. Where do those numbers end at the end of the year? Because on some teams, I think this would be okay. But the Diamondbacks don't really do the high strikeout guys unless there is a lot of power behind it, as we saw with Gino. Mm-hmm. And I do want to see where the slug is at for him at the end of the year. I agree. Like watching him on the day-to-day basis, it seems like it's good decisions at the plate for the most part. And like he's seeing the ball well, as you mentioned, working the walks and stuff. But if the strikeout numbers just continue to be as consistent, I think he struck out in every game so far. Like that's been the main thing for him defensively.
Yeah, it's a 37%
seems like he's been
strikeout rate so far. It's not great.
It's rough. Defensively, it seems like he's been fine. That was the one part I was curious to watch on him, because the scouting reports I read were mixed on how good he was there, but it was more of a consensus that he was at least solid, which is what they need. They need that over there for sure. Up the middle, do you think that we're going to see any sort of mix and matching, or is it going to continue to be Marte and Perdomo with what could be happening at third base? What I mean by that is, like, is Jerry going to get a couple more days off if they're out of it and they start to give other guys some looks?
Yeah, I think, typical like management, I think, with Perdomo, and, it's like, oh, the days off. Perdomo doesn't usually take days off. Like he's gotten like a couple of them this year, but he's posted all year. So if he takes a day or two for the rest of the season, maybe that'll happen. But yeah, he's going to continue to be there every day. And then with Marte, that becomes interesting, right? Especially, I think, when Lawler becomes ready to go, and what has been said about Lawler is he has to get up to Reno first and then earn his way back onto the major league team. But if he gets back up to Reno, is hot for a week, then I can see them wanting to get him up there pretty quickly. At that point, does it give you the kind of the luxury of starting Blaze at second base, Lawler at third base, and Marte more as the DH? And what does that do to some playing times for some other guys? But it is a good option, and I think that is probably the way you'd like to go, especially against lefties, because Marte, he's dealt with nicks and bruises, so to speak. He's dealt with some injuries with the groin, with the hamstring. He's always dealt with some lower body stuff, but this year that's definitely come up, and they've had to manage that. So I think finding ways to like keep him in the lineup without maybe having him play defense every single day would be beneficial. And once they have that gluttony of like infielders that they can trust to start on a semi-regular basis, that would make some sense. But yeah, for shortstop, it's going to be Perdomo every day until the season is over. Third base is real interesting because Jordan Lawler is coming, and he's also one of those guys who was playing in continuation camp games over at Salt River. He's going to show up at Reno pretty shortly, and then it's just about him playing well and fighting his way back onto the major league team. Blaze Alexander's been real good lately, and he's showing some pretty good signs of not only just being hot, but also some good development. His at-bats look a lot better than they have earlier in his career. Certainly better than last year, but also better than when he first came up. I mean, this has been a weird year for Blaze. He was in the, kind of in the mix for the backup shortstop role in spring training, hurts his oblique, and he doesn't, he starts the season on the injured list. He does not play particularly well, especially defensively, when he first gets back to Reno after coming off the IL. But he worked hard to iron that out, comes up to the major leagues, and I think he doesn't play for like 7 or 8 straight games, where he's kind of an afterthought. And now after the Suarez trade, he's had to play every day, and he's looked good. The strikeouts are still the strikeouts, but he's hitting the ball a whole heck of a lot harder. He's making pitchers work, and he's playing a really good third base defensively. And that's what's kind of interesting to me too, is that he has the versatility to play in a lot of different spots, but where we haven't seen him is kind of lock down one position for an extended period of time. He had the opportunity to do that at shortstop last year when Perdomo got hurt and wasn't really able to do it, and Kevin Newman kind of took that job. Now at third base, he looks really comfortable. So, but Lawler didn't look good at second base when he was up here, and third base is the position for him going forward. It looks like with Perdomo at short. So it does look like that they're going to lean into the versatility with Blaze. But for right now, the way that he's been playing offensively and defensively, you got to keep him in there regularly and see really what you've got out of this player who might be a really important utility guy for you moving forward.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that you don't really have a place for him when this team is fully healthy right now in terms of everyday reps, but you're still going to have to figure out a way in the last 2 months of the season to get him some playing time. So that's why I asked you. I was curious if you thought maybe Perdomo gets an extra day off or 2 or 3 or 4 towards it in September specifically, and like Marte, same kind of thing, where you can find him some at-bats, because Jordan Lawler needs to be playing every day the rest of the year once he gets here. It's time to really see what's going on with him. And that's the thing, is like, I like the way that you framed it about Locklear, is even if we get to the end of September and Lawler hits like a 900 OPS rest of the year, does that mean like he's a future superstar? No. And if his OPS is 500, does that mean he's a future bust? No. We can lean a certain way, one way or the other, but we're still dealing in a pretty small sample size.
Yeah, Lawler's
overall,
23 and Locklear is 24.
Exactly. So the whole thing that you have to figure out exactly is just giving them the everyday reps that they need to be comfortable to take those in 2026. And if they are those guys specifically, Lawler is obviously the one because you're very familiar with the farm system and where it is at right now. He is really the only standout prospect that they have right now and have had in the last couple of years outside of Corbin. Who is ready to go for like stardom, essentially. Like that is where he is at. He's been a top 5 to 10 prospect ranked for 3 years now at this point, and those guys are expected to be very good baseball players, if not stars. And he is the guy where you look at Carroll, you look at Marte, you look at Perdomo. This is someone that I've always been optimistic about the overall player that Gabby can be, but joining that echelon or being near that echelon, Lawler's really the only guy from a talent perspective who can get there in terms of the position players. So this is a very fascinating 2 months for him or 6 weeks for him. It's more going to be like to see what he can do to hold down that role. And the small sample size theater part of this is fascinating, Alex, because let's say Blaze keeps doing this the rest of the year with his opportunities that he gets. And let's say Lawler keeps looking the way that he did in his very short abbreviated 2 stints before. Not that there's a controversy of like who gets to start at third base in 2026, but like, does Blaze do enough to earn serious consideration in a way where we wouldn't have even been talking about him? And I wrote those stories you mentioned. Blaze wasn't in it because the whole focus was on Lawler. He's now deserved to be in the conversation for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting too, what exactly you can do with Blaze because they had him playing outfield a little bit in Reno before he got called up and has been, specifically an infielder. I don't know if they would do that to him down the stretch of this season, but is that something where, for next year, if, Gurriel opts out or something along those lines and you need another guy out there, that becomes interesting. Tommy Troy is somebody who's had a great season, speaking of the farm system. Tommy Troy's had a great year, and he is in AAA Reno right now and looks like, not going to come up this year, I wouldn't think, but maybe next year at some point. But he's also gotten a few outfield reps, so they are willing to try. And the cool, the thing about drafting a bunch of shortstops is they're typically pretty athletic and they can play a lot of different positions. And so, they haven't been afraid to kind of see what guys look like out there as they try to figure out this puzzle of having all this talent, but they are going to have a little bit of, it's funny because a few years ago they had so much of a surplus of outfielders, and now with all the guys coming through, it's like, they might have better depth when you're looking at their infielders than you do with their outfielders. So yeah, it will be interesting to see whether or not they continue to explore that during the offseason. But for the rest of the regular season, when you're kind of putting it all together, it's like, okay, against righties, Pavin Smith is back. We're going to put him at DH, but then if Catel's at second and Lawler's at third, where we put Blaze. Against lefties, maybe we can have Cattell be the DH and Blaze at second and Lawler at third, and we can try to put it all together. But yes, Blaze has become a firm player to watch for the rest of the season, as is Lawler. Outfielders, I think this is a pretty clear one about who the guy to watch is out there, and I think it's Alek Thomas.
Do you think that this is the same outfield starting on opening day next year, or do you think there's a change, whether it's Gurriel or Thomas? Because Corbin Carroll is going to be in right. I mean, maybe he switches to center or left or whatever. But do you think that there's a new starting outfielder for the Diamondbacks next year? Like not Jake McCarthy, not Alek Thomas, not Lourdes Gurriel Jr., like not someone in their system randomly. Like, do they find an outfielder somewhere else? Because I think this is like the clear place where they can target an upgrade with what we've seen from these guys the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some differences. I mean, obviously it's the trade deadline. A lot of different guys get thrown around in deals, but Lourdes was out there as potential trade candidate. McCarthy and Alek, they've like toggled between who gets the playing time / who's like more in trade rumors over the last like 2.5 seasons, it's felt like. And with Gurriel, as I mentioned, he's got a player option for I think $13-14 million. Unless he gets super hot down the stretch, it feels unlikely that he turns that down just because he's had kind of a quieter season than he's had over the previous couple with the Diamondbacks. But he could get hot. He's looked better at the plate recently, and for some reason has become a Gold Glove defensive player for the last week with that throw yesterday and the diving catch before that. But yeah, no, I totally can see that. I think this is a big stretch for Alec because we've obviously seen it in spurts. Since the trade deadline, or no, really since the All-Star break, Alec has been real good offensively. He's just impacting the ball a little bit better. He's lifting the ball a little bit more. The strikeouts are still there. He still doesn't really walk. That's part of his profile at this point, that it would be, it'd have to be a real change for him to change that stuff. But his ability to get the ball in the air, the way that he typically hits the ball hard on the ground, it just gives him better opportunities to spray hits around, and we're starting to see that. And then defensively, he looks incredible. I think it took him a few weeks during the start of the season to kind of get into that defensive rhythm after missing so much time last year. But now he looks the part of a Gold Glove caliber defensive center fielder, and that's not something that you take for granted. So yeah, I could see potentially some changes, but I'm not sure what it looks like, and it definitely does depend on how hot Lourdes stays throughout the rest of the season, and if Alec can take some of the spurts that we've seen throughout his career and make it an extended run in the back half of the season, because I think then that changes the optimism and the expectations we have for him going into next year.
Yeah, and it's very important context here, and baseball is such a fun sport to talk about for a myriad of reasons, but if you're really into the roster construction element of it, this is one of those, there is no Tommy Troy right now for them, where there is a guy that could potentially be up next year that you would look at. Of course, the two guys, Caldwell and Waldschmidt, that are sort of at the top of their prospect rankings behind Lawler, aren't expected, at least by what the experts say, to be ready for at least a year, maybe two.
Caldwell's still super young, and Waldschmidt's in AA right now. Yeah, maybe at the end of next year for Waldschmidt, but we don't know. We'll see.
Exactly. Drew Jones was supposed to be this guy. Like I wrote it, I'm sure 3 years ago when they were mapping out what do the D-backs look like in 3 years, Drew Jones was maybe at the top of the depth chart in center, if not we know he's going to be there eventually. He's still in high A right now, so I don't know if we can include him in our future thoughts. The number 2 overall pick in the draft 3 years ago. It's still early. Maybe he could start to bounce back a little bit and start to become a part of the picture. But in terms of the picture for next year, not really going to be a thing at all for them. Are you ready to move on to the rotation and the bullpen? You got anything else to say on position, guys?
Yeah, not really. I mean, I think that's it. I mean, it really is. I think if we're looking at 3 guys in particular, it's going to be Locklear, Lawler, and I think Alec Thomas is in that group in terms of that. But I think you could put Blaze up there. You could put ADC depending what they do when Pavin comes back. But yeah, I think we can move on to the rotation because that's also going to be potentially very different because Zach Gallen is a free agent, and oh man, what is his market going to look like? He's been better lately, it feels like, but we've said that before where it goes on, 2 or 3 starts in a row where it looks pretty good and then kind of reverts. His next start coming against Texas against Merrill Kelly, that'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, he's going to be a free agent. Does he take the qualifying offer? Does he not? Does he, bring the Diamondbacks back some good draft compensation by getting a $50 million deal? Is there anything like that to be had out there? I don't know. I really don't know what that's going to look like. And then you have DeSclafani, who's, veteran journeyman who's filled in nicely so far, but is, not going to be part of the future plans of the Diamondbacks, I wouldn't think, unless they just bring him back to eat innings next year. Erod, Fott, and Nelson are the guys that you can, put in their rotation for next year. And then after that, we'll see. There's a group in AAA, like Cole Drake, who came over in the Merrill Kelly trade, tall left-hander. He just got there. He's made 2 starts in Reno. You have Dylan Ray, who's been pitching better lately. You have Spencer Geesting, who's another left-hander. Bryce Jarvis has been throwing down there for most of the season as a starting pitcher after starting the year in the majors in the bullpen. So this kind of another guy who maybe can come up and eat some innings. But then Christian Mena is the other one who looked really good until he got hurt. It's possible he comes back before the end of the season, but if he does, it's going to be as a reliever just because it's not enough time to build him back up to being a starter again. So that's those are the players we're looking at. There's, Yumin Lin, who has not had a good year. Gilbert Diaz has kind of had a disastrous year and got sent all the way back down to AA. We'll see what his future looks like. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And of course, they have a few other guys that they got at the trade deadline. But yeah, it does feel like this is a team that's going to go out and add a starting pitcher just because they need some stability. Whether or not it's somebody who's been here before or not, we will see. We don't know. But yeah, it really depends on what does Gallen look like the rest of the year? What does his market look like? And is he potentially back on a qualifying offer? And then can you build it out from there? And then you have just these young guys that you can kind of look at because, again, it's kind of like the puzzle thing. You have all these pieces, but other than the 3 guys that are for sure under contract and here next year, not entirely sure what the rotation is going to look like on opening day.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack with the rotation and just the money part of it specifically, because there's 3 guys that you mentioned where this starts to factor in. Brandon Pfaadt has got to start pitching like the guy that was paid for that extension. He has not been good this year. Now, again, he is young. He was paid because he is young, and he has shown a lot of promise. And I still believe that Brandon Pfaadt is a guy that will develop into someone that you can trust as your number 2 or your number 3 in a rotation, but he has not been that guy this year. He was for the majority of last season, and then the last 2 months of the year happened where he wore down a little bit, but this year he just flat out hasn't been good. Eduardo Rodriguez has been worse. He's been their worst starting pitcher this year, and that is a guy that has 2 years and $40 million left on his contract, and the reason why you're saying that he's going to be a part of their rotation next year is because of that fact. And that's really the only reason he would be in the rotation for sure next year. It's kind of beyond the Jordan Montgomery thing of like, okay, can you like get someone to potentially like maybe take on his deal in a trade or whatever? I don't think that's happening with the way that he's pitched as a Diamondback so far over 2 years now. And then Gallen is the interesting one where I would have thought it was crazy to suggest that he could just stick around on the qualifying offer 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. But watching what happened at the deadline, where clearly I think what happened was Hazen had this bar set of like, okay, we know this compensatory pick is like kind of like the bar that we want to set for like what we want to get back. And they didn't get it back. I'm guessing that it just never really came in. So they're in a position now where they can get him on the qualifying offer and then kind of see what happens from there. I propose like the 1+1, if they can get something like that done, where Zach, if he pitches well,
we've seen
yeah, for sure. If he pitches well next year, he resets his market. And if he doesn't, then he gets another year to do it again, basically. That probably makes the most sense for everyone involved. But then again, someone could have grand plans all it takes is one team, right? One team that had grand ambitions, that had a starting pitcher. They didn't grab it. Oh, well, Zach Gallen for 2.5 years is one of the best pitchers in baseball. Here's $60 million for him. And then all of a sudden we're done, right? So
yeah. Or someone
I do
convinces
wonder
him of the change of scenery will change your outlook a little bit.
The old shtick there. So those 3 guys I'm watching, Ryan Nelson, like in a world could be their opening day starter next year, which is kind of crazy, but
he's lined up for it unless they bring guys back. Yeah, maybe.
He's just been their best pitcher, not named Merrill Kelly, and Merrill Kelly is pitching against Zach Gallen in a couple of days, so it can't be Merrill Kelly anymore. And then all those pitchers that you mentioned in the system, right? It's like, are any of those guys going to be in a position to get DeSclafani out of this placeholder position sometime in the next week or two to get some looks? Because I think that's what DeSclafani is there for. It's just, okay, as soon as the first young arm that we think deserves this opportunity is going to get there. Cole Drake would be the guy you'd want to see get it, but he's going to have to pitch well in Reno in order to get that call up. Mitch
there, I would think, yeah. Maybe
yeah,
Dylan
exactly.
Ray, because they're going to have to put him on the 40-man anyway to avoid Rule 5. I wouldn't be surprised if we see DeSclafani in this rotation, at least for a while. Maybe
right.
At some point in September they get some other guys some looks, but barring another injury, knock on wood, he's looked fine and he's kind of kept them in some games for the most part, except for that A start, and they might just keep rolling with it unless someone really kind of grabs hold of taking that opportunity in AAA. Mena to me is really interesting for next year. He's still 22, which is crazy because it felt like we've known him for a couple of years now. It was real shame with the injury because I felt like there would have been a real opportunity for him to see a role increase this season. If he can fight his way back and get back on the mound just as a reliever for the last week of the season and have a healthy offseason, I think that would be kind of a big deal for them as they kind of evaluate what their rotation might be looking like next year. But it's certainly going to be interesting. I'll fight back a little bit on the Fott has been downright bad thing. I know his ERA stinks. It's a little bit over 5 right now. I think if you took out the national start, which went, oh boy, that one haywire, where he gave up 8 runs without getting an out, his ERA would be 4.46, which is right where his FIP is. So I think you're looking more along those lines than kind of the 5 ERA that we've seen. I think it's been inconsistent and a little bit underwhelming at times, but I do think for the most part he is giving you chances to win a lot of the time he's been out there. And I think he's shown some growth with the ability to develop some other pitches. But yeah, it's not quite what you'd envision potential number 2 starter looking like. I think he's more of a 3, 4, or 5. But Nelson potentially could be a 2 or a 3, and that's a good place to start. And if Erod can just, I don't know, we see if Erod can ... We've been saying that since he got over here. If he could be just a capable innings eater number 5 guy for next year, if you do bring back a Kelly, if you do add somebody who can kind of eat innings and be a top line guy, then you can kind of feel a little bit better about the outlook of the rotation for next year. But that'll bring us to the bullpen. The bullpen I think it's super interesting because they're kind of going in on the youth movement, and I'm happy that they're doing it, and I want to see them continue to do it. They have 4 rookies / prospects in the bullpen, with Juan Burgos coming up. Andrew Saalfrank is still rookie eligible. Kyle Backus and Andrew Hoffman. I want to see Brandon Garcia come back at some point. Whether or not they call up anybody else, maybe bring up Juan Murillo again just to give him some run at the end of the season, see what he's got. Because they have a few veterans in there now, or some are doing fine, some are doing less fine. But at some point, I think you want to get these guys in there, throw them into the fire, and see if they can kind of go on a run at the end of the season and figure some things out. But so I think that's, again, it's like, oh, how exciting can a bullpen with a bunch of like 24-year-olds and 25-year-olds be? I think that's a super interesting element of the rest of their season when you're looking forward.
I think that it is. I totally agree with you. And I think that it is the most clear-cut position that we're going to see where, from an auditioning standpoint, like that is what is happening right now. Because, again, we're dealing with a 9-game sample size, but Andrew Hoffman's allowed 1 base runner in 2 2/3 innings. And if he pitches lights out the rest of the year, does like a Ryan Thompson in a kind of way, right? Like, you're going to earn a mid-relief role for next year. Like that's how this is going to go, assuming like spring went well and all that kind of stuff, right? But Burgos is up right now. Hunter Cranton is the 4th guy that they acquired at the deadline. Now he's dealing with some concussion stuff still because he had a comebacker hit him in the head in, I believe it was in March.
From that, and then he had like a groin thing pop up. But yeah, he's been kind of in and out all year. But he does have a big arm.
Yeah, he does. And he was like back, and then the concussion syndrome came back and symptoms came back. So like you just hope that like all of that is gone for the rest of the year. Something to keep an eye on in the minors. But as you mentioned, big arm. Fangraphs rates him as the best prospect that they actually got in that deal specifically, which is interesting. Like had him rated higher than like Garcia, had him rated higher than Locklear. So I'm really curious to see where he's at and if he's back this year. But the guys you mentioned as well, Garcia was the most revered overall outside of Fangraphs. Like he was the guy, but he came up for 2. They sent him back down. They must have like seen something specific, or they wanted to get a look at Nelson and some of these other names first with all of the lefties that they have around now, which is like kind of a weird trend that has happened with them. But to your point, it's like we do not know who the closer is going to be for next year. We do not know who the 8th inning guy is going to be. We do not know who the 7th inning, like we don't know any of these roles at all. So it's totally wide open. Jalen Beeks is the guy who has pitched the best overall through the entire year and remains on the team because Thompson's dealt with stuff, Ginkel's dealt with stuff, and stuff being injuries and performance. Miller is gone. And those were your guys this year from a consistency standpoint and being up the whole year. So I'm, again, fascinated like you are to see can like 2 or 3 of these guys finish strong enough to end the year where we can pencil them into the bullpen next year, because that would help a ton. Because if these guys just struggle and they have to go into free agency and try and spend on relievers, don't do that. Please don't do that.
Or if you do it, maybe do it a little bit differently. I mean, it's so hit and miss with relievers. Yeah. Like the Angels went out and they, paid $10 million for an aging veteran closer in Kenley Jansen, and he was pretty darn good for them. And the Diamondbacks pay a $1 million on a minor league deal for Shelby Miller, and he's really good for them. But then other moves don't work out quite as well, and we've seen that over the years. It's really hard to build a bullpen, and it's now that they're doing it through youth, through trading for younger guys who are closer to the major league ready, who have really good stuff, who could potentially earn spots in there. And they don't have a closer right now. They're going, closer by committee, matchup, whatever you want to call it, because they just don't have anybody who's established in that role. Kendall Graveman has the most experience doing it, and he has not been great since coming over. He's dealt with a lot of injuries and just hasn't been consistent. I'm curious if somebody becomes more of a go-to, like not the closer necessarily, but if you have 5 save situations in a 10-game span, do 4 of those go to Andrew Hoffman or to Kyle Backus? And do they do well in that situation and well enough to kind of raise an eyebrow? Like, maybe he's not the closer next year, but maybe he's a high leverage reliever, because we don't exactly know if we're going to see AJ Puck or Justin Martinez next season. And if we do, it's going to be later in the year. So that's a lot of time to kind of navigate through, where you don't have 2 of the best relievers in the game, really, at least from a stuff perspective, but also from a production perspective the last year and a half. So it will be interesting to see whether or not they can kind of find some answers there. So yeah, I think when you're looking at, the pitching staff, obviously, Zach Gallen, I think, is kind of one of the main characters when you're looking at like guys to really keep a close eye on down the stretch. But you can pick of any one of those young relievers, and I think that's like really, really interesting to watch down the stretch as well. Okay, so that was a lot. The Diamondbacks, again, they have opened themselves up to a lot of these conversations by selling at the deadline and kind of having us look towards the future of this team. They are kind of miraculously 6 games back of a playoff spot after they swept the Colorado Rockies. It's still not, they're not in the race, I would say, quite yet. I mean, I think Fangraphs says them at like 1.5% to make the playoffs at this point. But you never know. They have 3 games against the Rangers and then 4 games against the Rockies. Like, what if you go 5-2 in those games, and then all of a sudden you're looking in a week from now, it's like, are they 4 games back? Or is this kind of interesting? Like, what can happen here? But yeah, that's something that, we can touch on another day, but when maybe they're closer and maybe they're not.
It takes 2 to tango, Alex, and the Mets are dancing. The Mets are dancing. So.
That's for sure. The Giants aren't doing too hot either. The Marlins have kind of fallen off a little bit. And so because of that, things have kind of crunched up a little bit. We'll see where they're at in a week. Not ready to quite go there yet. But it is something to maybe keep an eye on. And even if they're never like in the wild card picture, but they're at least they hover around like 4 games back and play like games that kind of matter, at least competitive games, I think that's beneficial too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's better than watching, a team that kind of flounders and now it's like only about the reps for the young guys, as opposed to kind of putting them in situations where they play the Brewers and the Dodgers. And it's like, oh, if you win these games, you might be able to have a prayer at making this an interesting race. So, lots to look out for down the stretch of the season. There is a month and 2-3 weeks remaining. Kellan, thanks so much for taking some time to jump on and ramble with me about a bunch of different guys to watch through the rest of the season.
Of course, buddy. As everyone can tell listening, we're very excited for the rest of the year, even though playoffs might be out of the future, but there's plenty to be excited about still about the baseball, and plenty of stuff to keep reading that you put up on ArizonaSports.com. I look forward to continuing to read. All
right. Thanks so much to everybody for watching and listening. Diamondbacks continue this week. They're in Texas, and then they go to Colorado before they return back home when they could have Gabby Moreno and Pavin Smith and Ildemaro Vargas back in the lineup. So keep it locked in on Arizona Sports for all things Diamondbacks coverage, and thanks so much again for listening.